Hello. Um, Apologize for Superintendent Carter not being able to be here today. I'm in charge of the Organized Crime and Corruption Unit, and Don is in charge of that as well. I have a group of 10 detectives throughout the state of Indiana that are all dealing in white-collar crime and organized crime and corruption, which falls primarily what we do is all the public official investigations. Of those, part of our responsibility is working with the State Board of Accounts. The State Board of Accounts has recently developed a new group of auditors that come in and work specifically in areas of concern or allegations of fraud. We also have one of my guys is assigned to the Marion County Prosecutor's Office in the grand jury, thank you, and in the grand jury. And we access a lot of records and things like that through the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, through the grand jury, because all those state tax dollars flow through Marion County, obviously. The other thing that we do as far as our unit is we participate with federal partners. The Public Integrity Working Group is one of the things that we attend with the federal prosecutors, the IRS, and other federal agencies. What that does for assistance in local government is when you are suspect a criminal incident that has occurred in your county, if we come in from outside, and I will bring in other officers from around the state to work those, it takes that burden off of your county prosecutor, and we present that to the federal prosecutor for potential criminal investigation. As an elected official and a public servant yourself, you have an obligation to, when you come into this office, to present. You may come into a situation where there's somebody there that's worked there for 20 years, and this is just the way it's done. Well, many of our investigations occur from people that have come in and worked there for 20 years and have done things the way that's been done. And excuse me. And it's just a situation that develops to where everybody thinks that this is the way it's been done, and then the fraud continues. Most of our investigations have been revealed from people going on vacation or being away from the office, and one person is responsible for that. Well, when that person is responsible, then they cover up that. And what I would encourage you to do as public officials is to cross-train your employees to so that everybody knows that responsibility. As the public official yourself, cross-train yourself with all your employees so that you know every part of every aspect of your office. Identify your areas of concern as far as high-risk areas for your office, for cash, reconciliation, and things like that. You need to know the ins and outs of your office. I know the State Board of Accounts, when they come in, if there is a situation that arises when you come in, if you don't take charge of that situation and deal with it, then you could be held accountable as well for that situation. So I would encourage each and every one of you to audit your office when you take office and make sure that you start off with a clean slate. Lead by example. As the elected official, I would ask that you lead by example and come into the office by being there, you know, having an open door policy, and open door policy to mean that the folks that an employee or a person of your office comes to you or any other office with an incident or a situation where of concern, just don't sweep it under the rug. Bring it to the appropriate person's attention that needs to be brought to. Bring it to the state police, the Organized Crime and Corruption Unit, your county prosecutor, but just don't sweep it under the rug, or you potentially could be responsible or held responsible for that fiscally and potentially criminally as well. Again, the cross-training, and consider rotating your responsibilities. If you come into an office, or when you do come into your offices, typically what we found is everybody has a particular situation or job that they've done and they've done for years. We encourage that you would rotate those responsibilities periodically, and periodically do an audit of your own investigation, internal audit, and review policies and procedures, but also cross-train so that when somebody's gone on vacation, that another employee takes that position, is able to conduct that position and carry on with that position. That in itself will help alleviate potential fraud within your office. Vacation, we would encourage you to encourage your employees to take their vacation time. In the past, we've had employees that have taken vacation time, and that's where a potential fraud or an allegation has arisen. For instance, the mail. We had one situation where one employee always opened the mail and was totally responsible for the mail. That employee left for a period of time, and that's where the fraud was located, because there were bills and invoices that were coming in that were not then shown to the actual elected official, and that's where the criminal allegation arose and started from that point, a simple fact of that. So again, I can't preach to you enough to cross-train your employees and encourage them to take vacations. Anything I missed?
Well, you know, it's tough because a lot of times when you take over your office, there may be someone in the office that's been there a long time, and there's a certain amount of trust that this person has. Family members, you know, that's another hot topic when it comes to public official investigations, because the people that you trust the most are usually the ones that take advantage of that trust and end up costing you in the end. And we've had multiple cases that have arisen due to ghost employment issues with family members. If you hire your family member to work in your office and don't hold them to the same standard that you're holding all the other employees to, your other employees are going to notice that, and they're going to make a complaint, whether it happens your first week or your last week. You know, that's a potential issue that's going to arise. And like Troy was saying with the cross-training, you know, I'm going to give you a couple of case examples here where large sums of money were embezzled from county and city offices because they only had one person in charge of payroll. And that person was trusted to do it, and that person took advantage of the system and either overpaid themselves or overpaid a family member or overpaid someone else that benefited illegally from the county or the city's money. So although we'd like to hope that we can trust all of our employees, everyone can be tempted, and you have to be leery of that. Sometimes people have significant life changes that cause them to do things that they wouldn't normally do. And then also, you know, the number one probably reason that I hear why people steal or embezzle money is because they felt like they deserved the money and that they weren't being treated fairly, or that something happened and nobody, you know, the boss didn't treat them the same way they treat everybody else, so they deserve this money. And then lastly, they always intend to pay the money back. It's just a loan. And because they have that availability of this funding, and they'll initially it won't be that large of a theft, but because it goes unmonitored and unaudited or unchecked by anyone else in the office, it starts to snowball on them. And then before you know it, the $3,000 they borrowed turns into $30,000, turns into $300,000. Because as you know, most people stay in these positions long periods of time. And during that time, we only usually go back about 5 years on theft cases, but a lot of times you go back and you'll see that it started 10 years ago. It just has snowballed to the point they couldn't pay it back anymore. So just a couple examples that we'll go through. I apologize, I've got a little bit of a cold. I was out at the Law Enforcement Academy this weekend. We're starting a new applicant process, and the first thing we do is a written test. The second thing is a physical test. So I was out there with them, and one of those kids got me sick, so I apologize for that. The first case I want to talk about, the investigation was in 2009. And the reason why we're going back a few years is obviously we don't want to talk about anything that's pending in the system right now. In this particular case, the State Board of Accounts was doing a routine audit, and they noticed that there were some discrepancies in the payroll. The individual that they were looking at had been there a number of years. Started actually, I think, back in 2003. And this particular individual was in charge of the payroll, and that looks like for the first 3 years, everything was running smoothly. They didn't find any discrepancies in the audit. In 2009, they were looking at the years 2007 and 2008. And then the investigation actually went all the way back to 2006. This person's base salary was $40,000 a year. In 2006, she overpaid herself with 24 checks totaling $54,000. In 2007, she overpaid herself 30 times for $90,000. In 2008, she overpaid herself 36 times for a total of $138,000. And in 2009, up until the month of October, which is the time that the discrepancies were noticed, she had overpaid herself $94,000. So the grand total of the overpayments was almost $400,000. I don't know if anybody remembers back in those years, we weren't in the middle of an economic crisis. So the funding, the funds that were being stolen weren't noticed as they would have been later on. And the entire time that she was there, the payroll was conducted by her and only by her with no oversight. Now, this person obviously had a problem, and we were able to track down some records and determine what she was spending that money on. But again, this was someone that when we went in there initially, and the State Board of Accounts did their audit, brought it to our attention, the town mayor was like, no way, not this, there's no way, there's got to be another reason, because she was a trusted individual in the community. The second case, in this particular case, it was a township trustee. And again, this is a situation where the trustee's elected and hires a family member to work as an investigator for the township, and also provides the same family member with a contract for business for the township. Once we got into this particular case, we took it to the federal level. This was one that came through the Public Integrity Working Group hotline, which goes directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And in our quarterly meetings, we evaluate the case, the tips that come in. In this particular case, because of the area that it was in, it was better to be worked at a federal level. And the IRS, the IRS, the FBI, State Board of Accounts, and the state police all worked on this one together. And again, in this particular case, there were the salary issues where they overpaid themselves. The trustee overpaid themselves approximately $85,000 over a 4-year period, overpaid his family member an additional $25,000, and then they had bogus contracts to either a company that they had established or through this other entity that they were using for about $20,000. State Board of Accounts were the first ones to bring this to our attention, although there had been other allegations of issues in this particular case. There was nothing significant that brought it kind of to the attention of the county prosecutor, and this person was so well liked. Another reason why we were glad that it went federal was because the county prosecutor's words when we initially approached them about the case was, if he convicted that person, he'd probably lose the next election because the person was so well liked. So that's a tough spot to be in when you're in a small county and everybody knows everybody. And again, even though they were stealing, he still felt like even if he proved that and got a conviction, he would probably lose the next election because of it. So that particular case went federal. It has been tried. I'm sorry, it has been pled out, and the sentencing is due this month. I believe they're looking at, they could be sentenced up to 20 years in federal prison, and then obviously with the feds, you got significant fines. The best part about federal convictions, not to brag, is that they serve 85% of their time too. And so the penalties for going federal and getting a conviction is oftentimes much greater than a state conviction, because in state prison, as you all probably know, you serve 50% of your time. And not always is restitution a part of your probation. Whereas with federal parole, the restitution continues, and if you don't pay the restitution, they'll violate your parole and you're back in federal prison. State, we don't have that good of a system to guarantee the restitution. So, and the last case I want to talk about, before we ask any questions, is a fairly recent case, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it is this person actually, again, was in charge of the payroll for a city and had she was an existing person, and after the newly elected person came in, made no changes, said, oh, you know what you're doing, just keep on keeping on, and we went on down the road. Again, we came up to the audit. She had developed a couple different schemes. One is she was the person responsible for typing in the names and printing out the checks. And what she would do is she'd type in the name so on the system that it looked right. And then when she got ready to print the check, she would change the name and print the check with her name on it. And then she would take those to the bank and cash them. Her second scheme was that she would just generate second wire transfers for herself. So she would pay herself once, and then she would repay herself for the second period, or for the same time period, and those would be deposited right into her account through a wire transfer. And between, let's see what the dates are on this one. Between 2012, February 2012, April 2013, she wire transferred about $6,308, and she wrote the checks to herself for about an additional $32,000. So her reason that she said she admitted to the thefts, but she underestimated it. She thought she had only stolen about $10,000, and then later admitted that it was probably over $30,000. And she stated she used her bills to pay the money to pay her bills and buy things for her son. And she took the money because of all the city officials' infighting and turmoil caused her to be stressed out way too much, and thus was her way of getting back at them. So this one was also presented to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was charged federally for bank fraud, and it's been filed, and we're waiting on a sentencing. So, you know, like Troy said, when you got one person in charge with no oversight, you're setting up a system for failure. You have to have multiple people that can step in and fill the role, especially in those key positions, cash reconciliation, payroll. You know, you have to have someone else to do the oversight. Don't be afraid to question things. If you're out there and you've stuck your head in and say, hey, what's going on, or what's going on with this, it could be all legitimate, but if someone knows that you're going to ask that question, then they'll be less likely to steal, because they know that they're going to get caught, or that someone's going to question, what is this, you know, what is this transaction, what is this bill that we're paying, what's this credit card that we got in the mail? I mean, it's just, as long as you're asking those questions, it will deter the theft from your offices. Probably the number one type of crime is theft, obviously. Number two would be official misconduct, which is an underlying, you have to commit, in Indiana, the law says you have to knowingly and intentionally do something to be convicted. The law for official misconduct basically says that the law that you're breaking has to be a law that is directly related to your elected position. So in these cases, you know, the people that were in these positions, or not your elected position, but your public official position, it was directly related to that. So we charged official misconduct, which in the old system was a D felony. With some of these, because the dollar amounts are so high, clearly over $100,000 is a C felony. And then the federal level, the different levels of the 18 USC is different, but they have to be knowing intentionally. Now, if you go out and you get arrested for drunk driving, you can't be charged with official misconduct because that doesn't really have anything to do with your elected position or your appointed position. Years ago, it used to. They've recently changed that law just here a few years ago, but that's what we're looking for. And a lot of it can be eliminated just by your oversight and taking the time to make sure when you start in your offices that it's a clean slate and that you're not afraid to approach your employees and ask questions. Does anybody have any questions? Sorry. Go ahead. If you can afford it, you know, that's the number one problem that we have, not just with public officials, but with some of these smaller businesses that come in and make the complaints to us because they can't really afford the audit. I mean, it costs a lot of money to do an audit. It costs them even more money to do a forensic audit. But if you can afford it, it is nice to have that. The State Board of Accounts, I mean, their folks do a good job. The problem is there's just not enough of them, and so the audits aren't as frequently as they probably should be. Right. 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 And if you suspect, if there's something that you definitely suspect there's an issue, your first call should be to them. And generally what happens is, even if you call us, we're gonna call the State Board of Accounts and have them go in first to do that audit. So if you are suspecting that you have an employee or you have a problem and you're missing some funds, we can help to facilitate getting them there and making it a priority. And they've done that for us many times and kind of gone out of rotation and taken that and made it a priority because we suspect that there's criminal activity.
And we recently, to follow up on that, like I mentioned earlier, the State Board of Accounts here in the last several months has implemented they're kind of divided themselves in these forensic audits and then the normal audits. And we work with that unit, the forensic side of it, the fraud investigator part of it, their audit team. And they have 5 sectors throughout the state of Indiana, and we work with all 5 of those supervisors and all of the State Board of Accounts in that degree. So when we get an allegation that either comes to us or to them, we talk back and forth frequently, and even in the Public Integrity Working Group and that with our federal partners with those kinds of situations. So it really helps with my unit working hand in hand with them so they can do the audit part of it and we can do the investigation part of it. So it is actually it's a really good match between the two.
Yes, sir.
And that's the question I had, but then when would you take it to your local prosecutor and say, you know, is it after the investigation or is it, you know, you say, hey, I think there's something going on here, and what, is he going to bring in the State Board of Accounts anyways to?
Yes, I mean, that can happen as well. Most of the time, too, the State Board of Accounts does their routine audit and they find something. And then they'll forward that audit to your county prosecutor.
Okay.
So I think they're required by law, actually, to send it to the county prosecutor if they suspect that there's an issue. We usually know about it before they're done. But yes, I mean, sometimes it starts with someone making a complaint to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor contacts us, and we contact the State Board of Accounts. Sometimes it's through the State Board of Accounts that the prosecutor's notified there's a problem and the prosecutor contacts us. Paul Joyce, who's in charge of the State Board of Accounts, is actually in our Public Integrity Working Group. So he attends our quarterly meetings with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so sometimes Paul brings those and says, hey, this is one I think that maybe, you know, based on the allegations that might be better for, you know, the IRS to look at or for, you know, a federal prosecutor to look at versus a state prosecutor, because Paul understands also a lot of times better than even we do what's going on in these smaller communities with the politics that happen. Not that that's a bad word, politics, but so it's just that there's an understanding there. So there's many ways that they get to us, but I would recommend, if you suspect that there's an issue, to either A, call the State Board of Accounts, or B, contact the prosecutor, and then your elected prosecutor can either contact them or they'll contact us and we'll call the State Board of Accounts. So. All right, well, thank you once again.